Hello, Miami alumni and friends. I am JJ Slager with the Alumni Association, and I'm eager to be joining you today for another webinar in our Love, Honor, Learn webinar series. And we have a special presentation today. Miami presents 3 steps to find a job you love in 2024. And I'm very excited, very excited today to be joined by Hallie Crawford. And Hallie is a certified career coach. She's also the founder of Create Your Career Path. And she's going to guide us on our journey today. As always, we encourage live questions. Thank you so much for those of you that submitted questions ahead of time. We'll get to some of those, and we'll also welcome your live questions at the end of the presentation as well. So with that, Hallie, I guess I will hand it over to you. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here with you all today. Greatly appreciate your time and questions in advance, as JJ said. I was teasing him before we hopped on today that I'm in Atlanta and I look like I live in Alaska, and he's got a short sleeve shirt on. So we're going opposite today with the weather. So I'm really excited to talk with you all about how to find a job you love next year, because my company is all about helping people enjoy their professional lives. It's so important because we spend so much time at work. And what we know is you can find a job that you really enjoy. And we're going to cover 3 steps today to help you figure that out. And I'll show you our agenda in just a moment. But just by way of quick background, I'm a certified career coach, speaker, and author. My company is based in Atlanta, Georgia, but we have coaches and resume writers in different places. I've been coaching and training since 2002. And I always like to bring that up for people because I know I might sound like I'm 20 or something. I'm actually 50. There's a lot more gray hair going on. And luckily for me, it's just underneath where you can't see it as well. And I have an undergraduate degree from Vanderbilt University and a master's degree from the University of Illinois. And the advice that we're going to give you all today is advice that we give to all of our clients to help them figure out their career direction, understand what their values are, and know what they need to be figuring out in order to find a job or a career path that they truly enjoy. And this is for next year, but also beyond as well, obviously. So let's go ahead and dive in. Before we get into the next slide with our agenda, this is such an important topic, I think, because obviously in the past several years with COVID, now that AI is coming out and there's all these different kind of changes in the workplace, the way we work has changed, and it's pretty much changed for good. Even if you're back in the office, there may be some people that are working remotely or hybrid, et cetera. And I don't think we're ever going to go back to the way it was. And I think there's obviously pros and cons to both. But the reason why it's really important now to think about finding a job you really enjoy is because in the past several years, what we have noticed is that their priorities have changed a lot. Like when we were working from home, a lot of people started to reflect on, okay, what's really important to me? How do I want my professional life to look? What we want from our work has changed over time too. And the way we perform our jobs obviously is really different, which I think has impacted so many people's satisfaction in different ways. And so this is why it's such an important topic, I think, to discuss even more so as everything has changed so much in the past several years. So let's take a look at our agenda for today. Here's what we're going to be doing. So there are 3 steps that we want to cover. Why fulfillment is really important to finding a job that you love. We're going to talk about our ideal career model. And this is a tool that you can totally get our slides from today, and you can download and use it for yourself as a great checklist to help you figure out your career direction. If you'd like a copy of our slides, you can just email us. It's on the left-hand side here at admin@Create Your Career Path. Happy to share those with you. So we'll talk about fulfillment and why we think that's really important to finding a job you love, even though we want you to think about other considerations too. We'll discuss our ideal career model. Then we'll start to talk about branding yourself for that new direction and how to find like different opportunities out there. And we will have time for Q&A today. So just as an FYI, Please feel free to submit questions along the way. We did have some people submit questions in advance, and we will get through as many questions as we possibly can today. But if we don't get to your question, just FYI, or if you think of a question a few weeks later, which happens to me all the time because I'm actually more introverted than extroverted, you can feel free to use the same email address that's here for the slides to ask your additional questions as well. Happy to answer, no problem. So as we get into this, one of the first things before we get to our first step is I want to spend a couple of slides talking about the right perspective to have on finding a job that you love and why this is so important. So first of all, we always like to tell our clients that you can have a job that you truly enjoy, but you need to have the right perspective about this whole thing. Nothing is going to be perfect every single second of the day. So I know we've all heard this old saying, do what you love and the money will follow, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I agree with that to a certain extent, but I also don't agree with it. I love what I do, but the money didn't just follow. I had to work very hard to grow my business, and I still do so today. But what I will tell you is that I really enjoy what I do. And so it doesn't feel like work as much to me as the jobs that I used to have that were not a fit. So the right perspective to have, everybody, is not that think something's going to be so perfect and you put so much pressure on this process that it's like, oh, if I just find that needle in a haystack, everything's going to be perfect. That's unrealistic. What you want to say to yourself or be able to say to yourself instead is, the good parts about my job so far outweigh the bad parts or the things that I don't quite like as much, that I can deal with those things. And that's how I feel about what I do. There are things that I don't like as much sometimes about running my own business. That's just normal and natural. There are always going to be things that you may not like as much about your work environment, a coworker that's difficult, whatever it is. But what you want to be able to say to yourself is, number one, the good stuff so far outweighs the bad, that I barely notice those bad things. And number two, what we find is when you are at choice about where you're compromising in terms of your career path, you're going to feel so much better. If you say to yourself, I can deal with this stuff over here if I have all of these other things, it is going to be the right fit for you because you've made that conscious choice. So it's not absolute perfection all the time, and it's also not waving a magic wand, but it can be so fantastic. That's what our clients tell us, and that's how we feel about what we do. Why is this such an important topic? We already talked about this a little bit, but too many people are still unsatisfied in their jobs. And as I said earlier, we spend a lot of time at work. It impacts your mental health and your personal life. So it is really important to have a job that you at least can say to yourself, I really enjoy this the majority of the time. I get a sense of accomplishment or satisfaction from what I do. However it is that you want to kind of articulate it for yourself, you can truly enjoy what you do. Too many people are kind of quiet quitting still, we have found, and a lot of people are wanting to make a career transition. And one of the first things we want to do as an exercise, or we would recommend as an exercise, that can really help you start to figure out, okay, what would be the right job or career fit for me? It's listed in the middle of this next slide here. So if you take a look, one of the first steps we have our clients go through is to separate what works for you at your current job and what doesn't work for you. Create a list, kind of one column on the left-hand side, another column on the right-hand side of likes and dislikes. Because what it helps you do is it helps you kind of look at things objectively and in black and white on paper instead of it swirling around in your head. And you can start to, number one, identify themes in what you're saying. So for example, are you talking a lot about, in terms of the things that you don't like, really about the work environment, and that's the main issue for you? Or is it more about the tasks that you're performing or some other things? Identifying those themes can help you figure out what would be better for you and what needs to change versus just saying, well, I have to start all over again and make this huge dramatic change. Some people don't have to, which is the good news. The second reason why this is important is it can help you clarify as well what is like permanent dissatisfaction versus short-term satisfaction. So if you're like, it's really about this project or this client I'm working with right now, Maybe that's something that's going to change in a 6 months or something, and you'll go back to liking your job. So this is why we feel like writing this down as a first step can help you be less emotional about the whole process and a little bit more objective about things. And if we could launch our first poll here, JJ, that would be fantastic. If it works, great. If not, we'll get some answers from people a different way. But part of why I want you all to think about this, and we feel this is really helpful too, is because I'll tell you this, 9 times out of 10, when people come to us for our coaching services, they will usually say, I'm so unhappy that I feel like I need to go be a chef, or something completely different than what they've been doing in the past. And normally they have to make less dramatic of a change than they thought they did once they go through our model and our process, etc. We're usually just really frustrated and unhappy, so we think we have to do something really big. So keep in mind, your change may not have to be a huge dramatic one. It could be a course correction, and this is part of what we want you to take away from today too. Okay, cool. So it looks like we've got slightly unsatisfied and unsatisfied kind of neck and neck there. Think about, with this particular slide and this particular poll, we want you to think about kind of, and I don't want to say it like too dramatically, but where are you in terms of feeling frustrated about your job? Force yourself to take a step back and say, okay, let me be objective and rational and practical about this. And let me assess like what needs to be different and how dramatic of a change I need to make. Okay. So thanks for participating in that poll. The good news, as we've said earlier, is that you can find direction and fulfillment. And I would like you to think about, as we start to talk about fulfillment and why we feel that's such an important piece to figuring out or determining, defining a job you love, is that we want you to start with fulfillment first, because it helps you brainstorm more ideas and find out what else is out there that could be a really good fit for you. It's not because we don't want you to be practical. You have to pay your bills. You have to think about compensation and all of this other stuff. But what we find is if people start with this fulfillment thing or idea first, they brainstorm a lot more ideas and get closer to a job that would actually be a really good fit for them than if they start with those practical considerations first. And we also would like you to think about, please, that you may say to yourself, yeah, I really want to love my job. But other people are like, I don't have to love my job. Other people might say, I just want to have a good sense of accomplishment or satisfaction from it. However it makes sense for you, that's how we want you to think about it. There's no judgment and like it has to be this one way for you. Okay. So let's go into our first step, and this is defining fulfillment. We talked already about why we think this is so important. What we have found is if our clients take an extra few minutes to really think about what their career values are, what's really deeply important to them, and what could give them meaning at work, they brainstorm a lot more ideas than they would have otherwise. And they start to find out about jobs out there that they didn't even know existed. There are jobs out there that I don't know exist. Okay. I'm not a supercomputer that has everything in my head. So here's why also we feel that fulfillment is so important. Number one, it's also the most difficult thing to define. If you look at the left-hand side of the slide here, it's usually the thing that our clients struggle with the most. And so we usually have to help them with this a little bit more than otherwise. Sorry about that, guys. Number two, as we've already said, it helps you think outside the box with ideas. And it will give you more career ideas closer to what would give you meaning. So what we want you to do as we move into sharing our career model a little bit more, which I'll do on this next slide, what we have people do, and we highly recommend it because we find it's the most useful way to do things and gives you the most ideas, is you start with fulfillment, and then you can start to narrow down your ideas based on those more practical considerations, like experience in education. Am I qualified for these things? Are they going to leverage my strengths in the right way, et cetera, et cetera. And also why we feel fulfillment can be so important to people is that it impacts all areas of career fit and satisfaction. And our personal lives or our professional lives, as we said earlier, impacts our personal lives too. So here's the deal with the model. Let me dive into this for just a second, and then we're going to go into a little bit more detail with it in just a couple more slides. But the reason why we like fulfillment first, this is our ideal career model. It's a model that I developed when I first started my coaching practice 25 years ago. And what I have found over time is that fulfillment too impacts every other piece of the model. And here's what I mean by this. What studies have shown is that if you are not leveraging your strengths in your job on a regular basis, those strengths that you really want to leverage, you're not going to feel fulfilled. If you are not in a work environment that you feel supports you or that is aligned with your values to a certain extent, et cetera, you're not going to feel fulfilled. So basically, the other reason why we want you to think about fulfillment is because it impacts everything else or interacts with every other part of your career path too. Let's talk about next how to define fulfillment, because we've been talking about fulfillment a lot and it's like, okay, Hallie, how do I figure this out? So there's lots of different ways that you can define fulfillment. And I would invite you to try all of these and see which one works best for you, or pick and choose what resonates the most for you as we go through some of these possible exercises. So our first exercise, as we started out with earlier, was to write down your list of likes and dislikes and compare those and see what the themes are, etc. If you look on the left-hand side of this slide, some of the other things that our clients have found successful is to journal for just a couple of minutes about how you define success. So write down for like 5 minutes and don't think about it too much, but just kind of blurt this out on a piece of paper on your computer. What does success mean to me? That can give you clues to some of the things that could be fulfilling and rewarding for you. Another thing that we suggest that people do is to dig underneath your interests, your passions, your hobbies, even things like outside of work, things where you lose track of time. And the reason why we recommend this is because if you think about for yourself, what is appealing about those things? Why am I drawn to them? That can give you clues to some of your possible values. So even if you have a hobby, let's say if you're a photographer or something like that, it's not a practical career path for you because it would be too hard to build up your photography business. You don't want to run a business, et cetera, whatever it is. There are clues under the things that we read for pleasure outside of work, the TV shows or movies that we're drawn to, topics that we tend to bring up with our friends and family. There are clues in all of these things to what our values as a person are. And those can then translate. You can start to think about those things as what are my professional values as well, or what of those values would I like to be honored at work? A couple of other ways to define fulfillment are listed on the right-hand side here. You can also think about and journal about your ideal day at work. We have some clients who will create a vision board because they're really visual people and visual learners to put pictures up about what their ideal day at work could be. So that's another possible way to approach this. And the final way that we will have some of our clients identify their top career values is to use what we call a peak experience exercise. And we like for them, honestly, to identify a peak experience that was personal for them versus professional. Because what we find is if you start with your personal values first and then translate those into what you want to be honored professionally, you're going to get closer to what is truly meaningful for you as a person versus like picking from a list online of, okay, I Googled career values and I'm going to pick from that list. Those are not always quite as meaningful as if you're doing one of these other exercises. So a personal peak experience exercise is basically where you think about a moment in time or a period of time in your life where you felt lit up. Things were rocking and rolling in the flow. It can be anything. Some people will tell us it was a trip overseas and their first one, let's say. Other people have told us, for example, one guy said, it was when I was the editor of my high school yearbook. And what we want you to think about with your peak experience exercise is what was cool about that experience for you? Was it about the connection that you had with the people? Was it about the storytelling or something else? So for example, if two people have a trip overseas or their first trip overseas, is one person talking about that trip as it relates to the planning of it and the logistics and how many days they were going to spend at each place and where they were going to, like stay overnight or whatever. That's a whole different set of values than another person who might be talking about the connection to the culture, the art and history that they saw there. They didn't think anything about the planning and logistics. They left that to somebody else. They're more engaged in a completely different thing. That's a different set of values with the same peak experience exercise or example. So dig into what that peak experience was a little bit more. It's less about necessarily who you are with and the details of it, and more about asking yourself the question, like we said, what was cool about this for me? And what we find is if you share some of your examples and peak experiences, et cetera, with a friend or family member, sometimes they can help you pull out what some of your values are more easily than you can for yourself, because they're looking in kind of objectively. Now, why are we talking about this values thing? So if we look at this next slide, the reason why I'm harping on values so much is we find that this is just so critically important for people to know what their ideal career is or being in the right job. Values are your guideposts to fulfillment. And they're already like a subconscious way that you're making decisions, right? Just as a person. But what we want to do is we want to bring these values kind of up to the forefront so that you can more consciously align your life and your career decisions with your values, because it's going to be a better fit if you do that. Now, one quick note here from the bottom left of this slide, and then we'll keep going, is that values can be ethics or morals, but they're not just that. So what I want to say about this is, like, if you're thinking about your values, don't think about ethics or morals necessarily as a starting point. Some of your values may turn out to be ethics or morals, but what we tell people is that your values are almost like bigger than that. Values are things that when you perform a task in alignment with them, or you're in a work environment that is aligned with your values, et cetera, and you're able to honor your values through the tasks and projects that you work on, that job is going to be a really good fit for you in terms of that fulfillment piece. So that's how we want you to think about it. Now, there are ways that you want to think about after you've gone through, let's say, your personal peak experience, that we do want you to try to separate your personal values from your career values, because people typically do have a little bit of a kind of different list here, depending on what you want your professional life to look like. And what we tell people to kind of keep it simple is, if you look at the right-hand side, your career values tend to be a higher priority for you as a person. And I'll use me as a really quick example. My top two values personally are authenticity and risk. Authenticity for me is just critically important. And honestly, it's basically not just why I started my business, but how we approach our career coaching process. We are trying to help people be more authentic and true to themselves in their professional lives. And so both of these, for me, because they're my top two, they actually translate over into my business. I actually love running my own business because one of my values is risk. The way that that value is honored in my personal life is I love snow skiing and horseback riding and other things that kind of push the limits, at least for me. Okay. They're not huge. They're not skydiving. I'm not going to do that, but you get the drift. So you do want to try to think about, okay, once I come up with my list of values, which ones belong in the personal category for me and which ones belong in the career category, because that's going to help you narrow down career ideas and brainstorm them too. If we could launch our second poll here, that would be great. I'm really curious how many people know what their career values are. If you don't, that's totally okay. That's part of why you're here. But with this poll, what I've been finding, like in a really good way in the past year or so, is more and more people are actually, these numbers are going up. I think more and more people either know what their values are, or at least are starting to think about them. And I honestly think that's one of the silver linings of, having to work from home and all of this is, like I was saying earlier, that I think people are paying more attention to this stuff than they have in the past, which at the end of the day is a good thing. See, so this is actually good too. So it looks like we've got 8 people are saying no, and 4 people are saying, oh, it's getting a little bit closer. So this is what I mean by this. What I would tell you is that several years ago, we would have maybe 2 people saying that they do. So it's good news. And for those of you who are saying you're not alone. This is why you're here today. Take a look at some of these exercises that we've been talking about. Pick one of the ones that works best for you. And like I said earlier, just kind of to recap, and I'll use me as a quick example to make it a little bit easier for you. Those passions, dreams, and interests, even if they're not practical for you, themes between those can help you brainstorm some of the things that could be values for you. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a mermaid at Weeki Wachee. When I grew up, I realized, okay, that wasn't the most practical thing for me, not the right work environment, didn't live in Florida anymore, etc. But there are actually clues to my values of risk, authenticity, educating people while entertaining them at the same time. That's why I love presenting these webinars. So there are clues to things that even if it's not a practical career path for you, the reason why you're attracted to it, you want to think about that and ask yourself, well, can I get these things in another career path that would be practical for me? All right, so that's step number one, or tip number one for today. Let's go and move to tip number two. And this is digging a little bit deeper into our ideal career model. So as I said earlier, this model is something I developed to help people use kind of like as a checklist to help them brainstorm career ideas, but also to make sure that they were covering all of their bases when they were trying to define the right career path for them. The pieces of this model show you the 8 components to the right career. You have to consider all of these things, please, in order to head down the right path and narrow down your options. And we also find, just by the way, is that the model helps people identify their career goals for the long term, because we want them to have a goal for each area. And they help people understand their brand a little bit more too. So let's dig into this a little bit further. Fulfillment is the first one we talked about. We want you to say to yourself, I'm going to give myself at least a few hours of really thinking outside the box, brainstorming different career ideas, using the methodology that we'll show you here in just a moment, to just see what else is out there that I don't even know exists that could be fulfilling and rewarding for me. We start with that first. Next, we go to the left, and we want you to think about, please, your tasks and those tasks that have been most enjoyable for you over the course of your career. Is it project management? Is it financial analysis, event planning, whatever that is? This can help you brainstorm ideas, not just from what you're doing now, but what have you done in the past that you've really enjoyed too? Think about those peak experiences professionally as well. We then want you to go to the left and look at and identify your strengths. Where do you want to leverage your strengths for this next stage in your career or this next step? What are your top 5 strengths, and are you leveraging them really well now? Or are there other ones that you kind of want to bring up to the surface and leverage a little bit more? Your strengths can also give you possible keywords that you could plug into different job boards and career brainstorming sites to help you figure out what some alternative ideas could be. We then want you to go up to education experience. It's a good idea to think about your education in Miami. Were there classes that you took that you really, really loved, but you kind of had just forgotten about? This happened for me with my undergrad, even though it was a really long time ago. When I was starting to think about the right career path for me, I started to remember my psychology courses, my interpersonal communication, and education courses. And those were the ones I loved the most. So think about that and think about your past experience as well. These 2 pieces, as well as the strengths piece, though, too, can help you start to narrow down your ideas based on practical considerations. When you looked at and brainstormed all these ideas with the fulfillment piece, are there ones that you're like, this would be really cool, but I'm not qualified for that? So let me look for something that's related to that where I could get into that career path. We then want you to look at your personality type. This is a make or break for your career path. We have had so many people come to us and find out, they say at the beginning, and actually I'll use someone as a quick example. She worked at one of the big 4 consulting firms. When she first came to us, she said, I'm starting to wonder if I should be a chef. She was the example I was thinking about before. And when it came down to it, and she dug into our model, et cetera, she realized that she was actually doing what she wanted to be doing. She loved her clients. She loved her direct reports. And she really enjoyed a lot about what she had done or was doing as a consultant. It was more about the personality piece of the model, and the work environment. She had a really difficult boss. So when she looked at this, she realized a lot of things were actually in place for her. But what she decided to do is instead in-house consulting at a corporation that felt better for her work environment wise and a better fit for her personality. So she wasn't traveling as much. She was only working on one client. She could be more detail oriented internal consulting versus external consulting. With personality type, we want you to think about a lot of things here. Are you more extroverted or introverted? And how does that fit with the jobs that you're considering? Are you more of a big picture strategy person or more detail oriented? There's lots of different things here that we want you to think about that can be a make or break for your career, because you're not going to change your personality type. You are who you are. And we don't want you to try to shove yourself into something that doesn't work, but find something that can work around you more. Personality type and work environment interplay a lot here. So the work environment is going to be the culture of your organization, the location, are you working in person or hybrid, etc. What are the values and the mission of your organization, and do you align with those? So these things too, and I don't have an exact percentage, but I would say almost like between 60 and 70% of the clients that come to us, even though they think they have to make this huge change, when it comes down to it for them, it's the work environment that they're in. They realize that or discover, I can do something, the same thing I'm doing now. I just need to do it in a different industry or a different company or whatever it is. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. And then finally, last but absolutely not least, because it's really important, is compensation. And when you're thinking about compensation, it's not just about the money, it's about the benefits, the flex time, all of this other stuff too. So this helps you dig a little bit deeper into our model. And some of the things that we want you to consider are things like, what strengths do you want to leverage or continue to leverage versus move on from? So when you identify what your strengths are, you don't have to just say to yourself, well, these are my strengths, so this is what I have to do for the rest of my life. No, do I want to do it in a different way? Is there another strength that I'd like to leverage a little bit more for this next phase? You also can ask yourself, what are your transferable skills? If you're thinking, I do need to make more of a dramatic change than a course correction, what are those transferable skills that I can leverage to market myself for that new direction? And as we said already earlier on the right-hand side, what's the right work environment for you? Critical, kind of make or break. As a reminder, if you'd like to get a copy of our slides, you can just email us at admin@createyourcareerpath. What we suggest to people is they print this out and they start to consider each piece of the model really carefully by writing out, okay, what would be great for them? In an ideal world, what would their professional life look like if fulfillment was in place, if they were leveraging their education in a way they want to, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. And you can also kind of rate your current career on where it is right now with each of these pieces too, because that can help you get a sense of, okay, these are the 3 areas where I need the biggest changes. Everything else is okay. And that can give you a sense of what type of course correction or change you actually need to make. Okay, so just really quick, if anyone would like to learn more about our coaching services and want to dig into this a little bit deeper, we're happy to do that. I always offer a free consult. And just by the way, too, we do offer a discount for a Miami alum. Just make sure you mention that and I'll make note of it as we're having our conversation too. Let's talk next about career brainstorming. So we've talked about the model, and from the model, you can start to come up with some keywords that you can plug into different career brainstorming websites and job boards, et cetera. And we'll show you the process that we would like you to consider using to help you brainstorm different ideas. The problem or difficulty here with career brainstorming, honestly, is that there's no one website or supercomputer out there that knows all of the jobs that exist, right? And as a result, people are like, okay, how do I really brainstorm ideas and know that I'm covering all of my bases, right? And so this is what we have come up with on this next slide. And I'm looking back and forth, guys, just FYI, because I've got 2 screens here. This is the best process that we walk our clients through that we found to help people brainstorm ideas and make sure that they're really covering all of their bases from a practical perspective, kind of seeing what else is out there, but also narrowing their ideas down in a really good way. So there's 3 steps we want to suggest that you take to find a job you love. So we've covered the model, all of that. We want you to come up with first a list of keywords, and we'll talk a little bit about that more in just a second. But if you plug those things into general search sites like Google, we have actually found websites, blog posts, articles, etc., for people that are incredibly helpful when they Google careers in data analysis or careers related to event planning. You can play around with your keyword strings there, but if you put this in, you'll come up with on the first page of Google a couple of possible websites that you want to go back to learn a little bit more about what else is out there. The second step would be to use career brainstorming sites, and we'll show you what those are in just a moment. Plug your keywords into there, and it's going to map you and match you to different brainstorming websites that are out there. And then the third step we want you to take is to plug those keywords into job boards, because that's when you're starting to really make things real and see what's actually out there, but casting your net a little bit wider, because when you plug keywords into different job boards, it's not just pulling from the job title, it's also pulling from the description too. So if we could launch our last poll here, that would be great. We're just curious how many people have gone through a process like this or anything similar where they've started to brainstorm things online using different keywords or keyword strings, however you've done it before. I'm sure most people have if you're here today, but I'm just kind of curious about that because there's a lot more technology out there that people can leverage. And on the one hand, we find it can be really helpful, but it's also can be kind of overwhelming too. And we're going to talk about that to help you stay organized as well. Okay, so the majority of people haven't, totally fine. This is the way that we would suggest you approach it in these 3 steps, okay? And thank you for participating in that poll. That's perfect. So first, before you dive into all of this, we really want to reemphasize it's important to be organized when you're conducting these searches because you can get lost on the internet. It's happened to me before. So it's a great idea to use like an Excel spreadsheet or something similar to that so that you can track your search progress and what you're finding and learning. Use Excel to track the keywords that you're finding or helping you pull up jobs that look like they could be a good fit, to track the career ideas that you're coming up with, the pages that you want to revisit, and the requirements that you're finding with each of the career ideas. Now, I'm saying pages you want to revisit because I want to reemphasize this too. That when you find a website or a web page that looks appealing and like it could be useful for you, we want you to bookmark it or copy and paste it and put it into your spreadsheet and come back to it later on in a whole session where you're reading through the material that you've come up with, because you know how that works. You go into the website, you find another link that you want to click on, and then you're lost and you can't remember where you started. So make sure that you do a quick glance of the pages that you want to revisit, copy and paste them into your Excel spreadsheet so that you know, okay, these are the things I want to read later when I'm doing a deeper dive. Now let's look at our overview of our websites. So Google and Bing, okay, those are straightforward. We don't have those listed here. So we do the Google search first, see kind of broad strokes what's out there. Then as we've narrowed down our keyword list based on that Google search, for example, or talking to people or whatever, we can plug our keywords into brainstorming websites. There are 3 listed here: onetcenter.org, myplan.com, bls.gov. These are really good career brainstorming websites that if you put a keyword in there, it's going to map you to career paths that are related to that keyword. Now, please keep in mind as you're doing this, you're going to come up with some stuff that you're not interested in at all. That's just part of the process. Your job is to wade through the stuff and say, okay, these are 2 or 3 things that I didn't know existed, and I want to read more about those later. These websites are not perfect. And remember too, that when you're using the career brainstorming websites and even the job boards, that they are not showing you every single component to our ideal career model. They may be showing you things that you could be good at, but that would be the wrong work environment or something else. So as you're going through your career ideas, you want to make sure you've also got your model printed out on your desk so that when you're picking things and choosing what could work for you, you're considering all of those components. The next thing we want you to do, kind of as our third step, as we said, is we want you to plug those keywords into job boards. So think of this process, please, as like a funnel where you're starting big and starting to narrow things down using the model, but also using the websites. The job boards that are kind of larger that we like for people to start with are things like Indeed, LinkedIn, Glassdoor. But as you get closer to conducting your search and applying for jobs, et cetera, we really like Indeed, but it's a great idea to start to search for industry specific job boards. Like idealist.org, for example, is really good for nonprofits, foundations, social entrepreneurship, those types of things. Okay. So let me say one quick thing in the next slide or two about your keywords. When you're coming up with your keywords, and this is something that a lot of times we have to help our clients with a little bit, your keywords could come from your interests, your values, your skills, projects, that kind of thing. So there's lots of different kind of places that you can pull your keywords from that you're going to brainstorm different ideas. Okay. We want you to use those general search sites, like we said earlier, to cast a wider net. And so when you're doing that with Google, et cetera, you want to use the keyword string of careers in something or other, or careers related to something or other. That's the good way to kind of adjust your search a little bit to pull up what you want. And then with the brainstorming sites, and in some cases, the job boards, it does kind of depend on the job board. And we'll talk about this more in just a moment. The brainstorming sites will help you narrow down your ideas maybe a little bit more or come up with new ones. But part of what we like about this, if you look at the bottom of this slide, is they can help you begin to make things a little bit more real, meaning you'll be able to see like the job requirements and salary and those types of things. So onetcenter.org and bls.gov, they start to give you salary requirements and also whether these jobs or this industry is on the rise or less so. And that's part of what we like about those too. Okay. So with job boards, remember, and I'm just skipping over that because we kind of already talked about the job boards a lot. Remember with the job boards, the reason why we like those is because it's starting to map you to actual job openings that are out there and can give you a sense of what exists kind of in your area, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so our third and last step before we get to Q&A here in just a moment is to start to think about, okay, how do I brand myself to actually go find this job that I would really enjoy? And by the way, as you're narrowing down your ideas and kind of identifying your target, it's okay if you have 2 or 3 kind of target types of jobs. As long as they're kind of related and similar, we know that when people are in career transition, sometimes they want to have, and we recommend this, a plan A, B, and C, because we can't always jump from one job into the job we love. Sometimes people need to get what we call a bridge job in between that's going to help them get their foot in the door, gain additional experience for that new direction, whatever it is. Okay. So let's talk about your brand and then we'll get to our Q&A. Obviously, with your branding, to reposition yourself in this new direction, you need to update your resume and LinkedIn profile. And there's a lot of different things you can do here when you're looking to make a course correction or shift. We want you to brand yourself on LinkedIn and on your resume for this new direction with a header at the top and have in your summary referencing like transferable skills and things that you have done that could be considered related to this new direction. It's a really good idea to have those measurable results in each of your experience sections. And you want to focus those results on things that could be relevant to this new direction. It's a great idea to get recommendations on LinkedIn for this new path that you want to kind of position yourself for, because you can use those to try to get in front of hiring managers on LinkedIn, et cetera. And it's really important too to keyword both your resume and LinkedIn profile for this new possible direction as well. Okay. We find that LinkedIn groups are actually helpful, and your alumni association LinkedIn group, and this is where you can leverage your alumni enormously, and JJ didn't pay me to say this, I tell this to all of our clients, it's kind of like an untapped resource that people don't always leverage. And we want you to leverage networking with your alumni, because if there's someone in a job that you're interested in learning more about, or at an organization you're curious about, having a quick conversation with them can be so incredibly helpful. Let me give you a quick example of your LinkedIn profile and where we want you to focus with your brand. You can brand yourself for your new direction using a branded banner behind your headshot. You can also do the same thing with your header underneath your headshot here as well. And then in your about section too is where you can start to talk about, these are my, you're not going to necessarily say these are my transferable skills, and change it from your current career path to where you want to be going. What are the different keywords you want to incorporate? What are the projects you've worked on that could be considered relevant to this new direction? So just know that, I know for some people, especially if they've been in a career path for a little while or a specific industry in the same one, it can feel hard to say, okay, how do I shift myself into this new direction? I think the cool thing about LinkedIn is it makes it a lot easier for us to do that in an easier way, because we've got the use of images, etc., where you're really positioning yourself in this different direction as much as you possibly can. All right, I want to make sure we have enough time for questions and answering what your specific needs are today. So I want to move to our Q&A portion. And I'd love it if, as we're going through these questions, if you would think about one action step that you would take in the next week to get you moving in this new direction. I actually think that this is a great time to be thinking about this, because it's a little bit quieter for hiring. We actually tell people to continue working on their search because we've had people get hired during the holidays, so don't stop. But if you're in the situation where you're like, okay, I need to figure out my direction, the downtime or vacation time during the holidays can be a great time to be thinking about these things and starting to work on everything so you can launch your search in the new year and you're really ready to do that. All right. And JJ, I forgot to ask one thing too. Is everyone going to receive a copy of the recording from today? I was going to mention that, but I didn't want to misspeak.
Yes, as long as you're okay with it, we will leave it on the website. And so the same watch link that they used today, they can share, or it will live on our webinar site.
Perfect. Yes, totally okay with that. That's fine. No problem. And then if anyone wants the slides, we explained that already, but the recording will be there. That's awesome.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Hallie. That was awesome presentation. I'm going to leave your contact information up there just a little longer while we gather some questions, and I'll get started with some of the ones that we received ahead of time. I have one from Jen, and she says, can you talk about a typical job search timeline? How much time per week does someone need to spend if they are initiating a career transition?
It's a great question, and a lot of people ask this. So if you're working in a full-time job, I know that that can be hard, especially if people have kids, et cetera, et cetera. I would want to devote at least an hour and a half to 2 hours a week on my job search to move you forward. Otherwise, if it's less than that, I feel like it's going to take a long time and there's, less momentum there. What we suggest to people is try to build it into your existing schedule. If you have a lunch hour or a lunch half hour, use some of that time, go to a coffee shop down to, whatever it is, to work on this a little bit, get up a little bit earlier on a weekend to work on it. That would be kind of my general estimate of it, and try to build it into your existing schedule so it doesn't feel like, oh, it's this whole other thing I have to do after I'm done at the end of a really busy work day and I'm tired. If there's a way you can build it in during the course of your day, that's even better. Great question.
Okay, great. Yeah, and I assume if someone's laid off or more urgently looking for a job, I often suggest to, picture your job search is your full-time job. So you kind of think of it as putting in the amount of hours that you would in a workday, really, right?
Yep. Yeah. Great. Thank you for saying that too, because I forgot to add that on. Yeah. If I would say at a minimum, you're spending like around 5 to 6 hours at a minimum on your job search during the course of a day. And I say that because I want you to do some self-care, and some of it's going to be networking or attending a networking event or whatever. That's not, I'm just sitting in front of my computer. But yeah, about the amount of time you'd be spending on your workday if you're not employed. Absolutely.
Yeah, great. All right, we had a few variations on a very similar question. A lot of people, so I'll highlight a couple. Leslie was asking about people over 60 with vibrant career plans still. Sarah asked about a career change at 55. And so someone else was an empty nester and or is now an empty nester after being a stay-at-home mom and wondering where to start. So a lot of variation on this later in career or getting back into career. Can you talk a little bit more about what might be different for those people and some strategies to that might help those people?
Yeah. No, it's a great question because we have a lot of people that will ask us those types of things too. I think a lot of what we talked about first will be similar in the sense of, okay, what your values are, your strengths are, those types of things. So a lot of the brainstorming will be similar from the inside out. However, your work environment, you may be interested in it being completely different. Or some people might be like, I really want to do something that has more meaning for me right now, and I don't need to make as much money, or vice versa. So part of what you want to think about too is life stage, how much longer I want to be working, and what does that mean? Like, I don't want to necessarily take a job where it's going to take me a long time to ramp up, because then by that time I'll be closer to wanting to be finished or whatever it is. So think about age and life stage. I do want you to think a little bit more realistically about things. Most people at our age, because I'm 50, don't want to necessarily completely reinvent themselves. We have people that had, so I'm not saying that you can't, but a lot of times people will say, okay, how can I leverage my past experience, but in a different way? I think the great thing about at this age is that you've got this wealth of experience that you can pull from when you're thinking about different ideas, but also you've got a lot more, let's say, transferable skills to pull from too, in order to get into something different. So those would be kind of my big things. I do know that people are concerned about ageism in some cases. I tell people, I want you to consider your age an asset and kind of like look for jobs that would consider your age an asset. We had one client once who went to work at a startup, and he was like, they're shooting Nerf guns all the time, and I just don't feel like I fit in. So think about, what kind of work environment and everything else would work for you. And with the ageism thing, there are ways that you can, not have some of your experience listed on your resume if it's over 10 years, or you just list it at the very bottom. But again, ageism is going to happen, and we want you to be focused on places that would view your age as an asset as much as possible, so that you're not as worried about it, but you're also finding something that's the right fit too. I hope that answers as a starting point.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. We have a few that are kind of getting more specific on some resume things. So maybe we can do some quick answers to help those people out. One was presenting volunteer leadership positions on your resume if you're out of work. And this kind of maybe goes to the last person too. That was stay-at-home mom. Like, technically on your resume, how would you suggest that you show a gap and you list volunteer things as more recent, or do you still go back to your job, or how would you frame all that up?
I would put the volunteer work in the things you have been doing. A, then you don't have a gap. B, it shows that you've been doing something, and you can talk about projects that you worked on, skills that you used, and even put some results in there if that's feasible. And I would just put it under your experience section. You don't have to say professional experience, as your header. You can say experience, and this is what my experience has been. But I'd rather you have something than nothing in that gap, and fill it as if it was a job, right? Like, you're not literally saying on there and lying. Like, you can say volunteer work at blah, 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 but I would put it there and treat it just as if it was valid and valuable experience, because in a lot of cases it is, and that's what you've been doing.
Perfect.
It's a good question.
Perfect. Okay, I've got one from Dave. that says, how do you reconcile job satisfaction with compensation? This is a tough one for you. How can one justify or think through a sharp decrease in pay in return for fulfillment and satisfaction? And for reference, in his case, he said he's in his 50s.
Okay. No, that's good. So thank you for this question. It is such a good one. And it is one that people grapple with. So remember when I said earlier, and I'm going to use an example. Remember when I said earlier, we're a choice and we have to make choices, and sometimes difficult ones. So one example was a client who was in his 50s. He had kids that were in college. Maybe he was a little bit younger. Doesn't matter. College was happening or coming up quickly and soon for him. And he honestly, his dream job, he felt, would be managing and being like the head of an assisted living like place. And when he looked at that, he was like, ooh, I would have to maybe get some more education, get some experience to do that, and it wouldn't pay as much. And he really felt like that would be his dream job. But when he looked at these things, he's like, I'm going to consciously make the choice instead to stay within kind of the realm of what I'm doing now, which was IT consulting type of work. But he moved into an industry and working for an organization that helped support its assisted and retirement living communities. So in some cases, we can get closer to the fulfillment. But honestly, for him, if he was making a lot less money, he wasn't going to be totally fulfilled because that would stress him out. So we do have to reconcile this. And what I would say is, are there ways that you can come up with ways that you can get closer to it? Maybe it's not the exact fulfillment, perform those tasks in a new or different way, or maybe in a different industry, but still get your bills paid. And eventually for him, like what he said at that point, is that he wanted to volunteer more at one of those places. And then later on, maybe that's something he could do in retirement. I hope that answers.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. All right. And let's get a couple more quick ones in. Abby asked, can you ask fellow volunteers or nonprofit leaders to write a recommendation based on your volunteer work, or should recommendations only be from direct coworkers?
It's great when it's direct coworkers, but absolutely volunteer, etc. People who have worked with you, and some like volunteer work can be like work, and absolutely, I would get them from those people as well, for sure.
All right. And then we have somebody wondering about switching from, Nathan asked about transition from a higher ed position to something else. And I suppose we could broaden that out. You talked a little bit about switching industries, but I guess we'll leave with any other global advice for people that are switching industries, because a lot of the people on this call, I'm guessing, are not switching to the exact same job. And so whether it's tactical from networking or resumes, if you could just share any advice you have about making a big transition, that would be great.
Yeah, no problem. So I would say, and this is a question we get a lot too, is get rid of the industry specific lingo and language that you're using currently that would make sense to someone in your current industry, and kind of, I don't want to say genericize it because that sounds bad, but genericize it a little bit more, and then steer it in the direction of the industry that you want to get into. So if it's higher ed, for example, into more corporate, you want to have a 2-page resume instead of a CV, if that's relevant for your situation. And you want to start using more corporate language and match it up with the jobs that you're trying to apply to. So putting in the right keywords for that job in that industry, and making sure that the way you're articulating your strengths, et cetera, and also the projects that you've worked on can translate over. The way you're describing things translates over and is not so industry specific. So in some ways it is genericizing it a little bit.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much. I think that's a great way to end. We really appreciate your time, Hallie. This was very enlightening. I love the process. I think that's something that's really hard, is how to get started, how to start thinking about that transition. And I really appreciate how you broke it down. So thank you so much for sharing that with our audience. We were very glad to have you. Those of you, like we mentioned, if you want to share this with others, you can share your link, or it'll be on our webinar site, alumlc.org/MyMeOH, with the rest of our webinars. We do have a professional development section on our webinar site as well. You can see past webinars more about LinkedIn, or more about virtual networking, or things like that might help you in your job search as well. So please check that out. And please don't hesitate to get in touch with Hallie if you want more information about her company or would like to work with her. And other than that, thank you one more time, Hallie. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a great
Yeah,
holiday,
thank you all
everybody.
for watching. Love and honor. Take care.